I brought a couple of handouts just to take a look at there. If you just want to pass them around. These are pretty much the same. Michael brings his own now since he's had so the only really difference is towards the back. We've got some information that's broken out by your planning regions. Because I know in talking to you before and then talking to some of the team that you guys were probably looking at maybe focusing on planning regions. So we're just trying to show an example of how you can break out the materials. But for the rest of it are all the same. So this is what I'll be going through today, is really introducing this workshop and the materials that you'll find in that book if you want to take a look at. When I talk through the modules at a very high level, I'll give you a sense of what's included. So my name is Brian Hobson, as mentioned before. I'm working in support of OEC, the Office of Emergency Communications. I'm just here to give a brief introduction and overview on this workshop that we put together. Just a quick background on us. So within DHS, we're the office that's really focused on interoperable communications all the way from the federal level down to state, local, and tribal levels. So working across the board with all those different stakeholder communities. Back in 2012, we were merged with, or OEC was merged with NCS, the National Communication Systems, and you can see the kind of the different the focus areas on those two offices. So there's several activities that take place within the office. We work out of a technical assistance branch, so we provide free technical assistance to all the states and territories each year. So this workshop would just be an example of one of those free technical assistance offerings. So as you can imagine, this has been a hot topic. We've been all over the country this past year doing these workshops. This is what we have currently done. We've completed 28 of these in states and territories, and have still have 21 left to go. So quite a few states and territories have requested this workshop. And really, what it is it's focused on. It's kind of broken into three categories. So we always try to kind of set the stage, make sure we always, as you can imagine, run into audiences with a varying level of understanding and background on this topic. So we make sure that everyone hopefully has a common understanding and background. It's all tailorable, so if it's a small group, has a lot of background, we can adjust the materials. If it's a larger group with not much, we can add more in there and adjust the length of it. But that Broadband 101 is kind of how we keep things off. That's what you'll find in the first tab of the book. And then we go into the two focus areas of the workshop, really, which is looking at coverage, Oregon coverage. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then also the user base. And what we try to do is to help guide and construct the workshop is we try to bring as much data information as we can and put together some considerations or a baseline for the states to look at, and then guide the discussion from there rather than kind of coming with a clean slate and then figuring out, okay, what do we want to do in terms of coverage and users. So that broadband, the first module, the Broadband 101, we call it, it covers a wide variety. We try to stay on, kind of touch on a lot of different topics. So everything from background on LTE and the technology and a little bit about that and how it differs from land mobile radio and push to talk. We talk about FirstNet and just making sure people kind of understand the fundamentals of FirstNet. Talk about SLIG-P and the State Local Implementation Grant Program and how that's going to relate and support the states and these efforts and those different phases, so people are clear on what goes on there. As new materials are put out by FirstNet, you'll see like some of the things that Ed spoke on are actually incorporated into our presentation materials there. So we're always trying to stay current. So depending on when you would want to hold this type of a workshop, we'll make sure that we've included the latest and greatest materials and are staying current with information. And that's why it's been so important with us and our coordination with FirstNet to make sure that what we're saying and what we're doing to help prepare the states is very much aligned with what FirstNet is doing. So after we complete that introduction and hopefully people a little bit better understanding, we talk about the next two topics and why they're so important to this overall process. So ultimately, one of the major components of that state plan will be that RAIN design. What will the coverage be for the state that you'll have? In order to get there, there are two key components that you need. You need to know what coverage is desired by the state and needed. And you also need to know how many users you have, because that's going to determine your capacity. And those two factors, depending on how much capacity you have and where you need coverage and what levels of coverage, will ultimately drive that final design. So knowing that that's one of the end goals, that's why this is one of the focus areas, that the sooner you can get started on that process and identifying what's needed there, the sooner FirstNet can get started on their design. And you can see from what Ed's presentation, that really kickstarts a lot of the technical components of the I'm sure with the experience that you guys have and with favors and other rigs, you can comment on the difficulties and challenges in those considerations for capacity. Yeah. just throw up some sites. Don't worry about that. So to kind of help again facilitate and guide the discussion, we created a baseline, an OEC baseline, and by doing that, we just wanted to kind of set the playing field equal. We were not favoring Wisconsin over Arizona or California. And you can imagine it's very difficult to kind of come up with that starting foundation, and then but the important thing is that it allows the states to then tailor that based on their needs. So we collected information on population density, national highway system, tribal information, several critical infrastructure facility data, and we wrap that into our states. Our state maps, and then kind of step you through that process. You'll see there's several maps that kind of build it up, and they're all examples just to kind of show you. It's all broken down into county level data as well, if you want to look at it from that standpoint. We give all the data off in the GIS format, so you have it, and you can make use of it however you need to. One thing we always like to clarify that this is working at setting coverage objectives. This is not coverage. We're not going in and estimating what the coverage levels would be. This is simply just saying where do you need coverage, let's target those different coverage levels. So that's the difference between a coverage objective and a coverage map. Once you identify what your coverage objective is, and you get that first design, that's when you'll start to see what the coverage levels would be, or the actual coverage of the network. So we put together this example just to kind of try to illustrate that. So imagine you have a highway or a roadway, and you said, we want vehicular level coverage along that roadway. So that would be the coverage objective. Once you actually determine what sites you're going to provide coverage for that objective, you can see the resulting coverage around all those sites is much, much more than what you see along the highway. So when you see those maps, that's the big distinction. That's where we're right now, just in this phase of determining where you need coverage. Down the road, you'll get that coverage prediction that will show you where actually have coverage within the state. And one thing we have in working with FirstNet, and you saw on some of Michael's slides, is we're kind of targeting, looking at coverage in 3 different ways, and that's really critical with the types of devices that will be deployed. So where would you need in-building coverage, where would you need handheld coverage, and where would you need vehicular level coverage? And that kind of translates to how close you'd have to be to within the site, and how many sites you would need to build up coverage in those different areas.
Okay, I have to go back.
Yeah.
Do you know how daunting that is?
So 28 times, yeah. I know.
So how many square meters is California?
Because you look at the in-building, I don't know where we wouldn't want to have in our larger metropolitan areas. How can you say we don't want in-building coverage in one area than we do in another? So in-building is going to be huge and very expensive.
Exactly.
And there's not a real good solution for it yet.
Right. So in building, the way this is being defined right now is just penetration through the walls. It's not necessarily building out and building within the buildings.
Okay.
Which is
that
a very
helps.
critical point, and that's very important. That will probably come down the road. So this is just really the concentration of sites so that you get that building penetration and you can rely on coverage that way.
Could you use technology similar to in-building amplification where you have penetration in the walls, but then it's, but then that a lot of times is up to local jurisdiction and is not funded by.
Right, so that whole discussion of how in-building coverage would work in addition to just wall penetration, so with bidirectional amplifiers and distributed antenna systems. That's still to be worked out and exactly how that will be tackled and the technologies that are there to provide that type of coverage.
On the in-building where I used to work in Beverly Hills, we had problems when we went digital going in buildings, and that just made every time you remodel the building, per the municipal code, you had to add amplifiers to it, or if you were going to build a new building. Because we were told in experience there that it's not that expensive if you're already remodeling a building or you're putting up a building. As long as they know about it in the beginning and plan for it, it's not hugely expensive for them. We just did it through local legislation to make that happen. So.
Yeah, that.
Your argument does suffer when you say Beverly Hills, I gotta tell you. But your point is well.
Yeah, but in the urban
In
area.
areas
like
of
down
interest.
there.
Just plan ahead, is your point.
Go with confidence. Go with
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Karen. A very important distinction is this is just simply,
Well, when you look at California, it's huge. I mean,
Right.
the roadways, I think, CHP is on every roadway, so that probably is a little bit easier to identify. But when you start looking at the in-building, it becomes very daunting.
Yeah.
Okay, I just had to make that comment. It was just like,
no,
it's gonna be smacked in the head.
It's a great comment, and so that's where, I mean, it's a good lead into how we kind of came up with the baseline. And so really what we recognized, and actually we went through all this work kind of coordinating with FirstNet as well to make sure we were kind of on the right path, the right track, and we're coming up with any wild assumptions as well. But in building, we kind of looked at where are you going to have your most densely concentrated population areas? And we use that to kind of define, well, if you're going to have densely populated areas, that's typically where you're going to need big buildings and a big building to meet that penetration. So we did that off kind of defined urban areas, urban clusters, which is 1,000 people per square mile. And we stepped you through all of this, and we build up maps as we go. So this is kind of a really quick deep look at it. So anyway, so we use different kind of population considerations for defining in-building, handheld, and then part of the vehicular level. For vehicular level, we actually it's a merge of kind of where's that rural threshold? Where does it make sense to build out a terrestrial network versus where do you want to rely on that satellite or deployable? So it was actually the PSAC, the Public Safety Advisory Committee, kind of threw out. They were using 5 people per square mile as a rural threshold. So that's kind of what we adopted with our baseline. So we use population density and draw out that threshold along with identifying the major roadways. That's the combination of where you get that lightest color green. And then with the resulting being that that's where you would target for satellite or deployable. So Michael brought up a very good point. But there are so many considerations though for just because there's not people there, it doesn't mean you wouldn't have common responses there. And so that's exactly why then we say, okay, well now that's the baseline. We know that baseline needs to be altered by the state and tailored based on public safety needs. What are all the types of data elements you'd want to consider to alter that baseline? And so we start off with several. We map out where all the agencies are. We've kind of thrown in some facilities and critical infrastructure that we think would be relevant to public safety. So anywhere from prisons and airports, EOCs, hospitals. You can see the examples, the critical infrastructure. You can see when you put that on top of the map, it gets really busy. It's a pretty significant task to undertake. And what is all the data you want to take into consideration to come up with your coverage of that? So that's why you can kind of see where we're trying to get states thinking about that early, to start figuring out how you're going to gather and solicit that input, so that at the end of the day, when you're done, and you can hand off to FirstNet what kind of targeting for your coverage, you'll be able to develop some type of tailored map that would look like this, that says this is where we need these different levels of coverage. And then they can take that and start designing that initial code, the network, and begin that iterative design process.
Because even when you look at the states where we have our PSAPs, I mean, there's 450 of them. Okay. And we have a lot in rural areas. In fact, we have one in Nevada.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. You know, Arizona, there's a prison out in the middle of, where they want in-building coverage, it makes perfect sense. So it's a good example of why population isn't the best. It's just a starting point, and then how we want to tailor and alter from that.
And then on the prisons, I mean, there's 33 of them in California. And there's a few in very populated areas, but for the most part, I mean, up in the very northern part of California, northwestern California, Pelican Bay. I mean, it's interesting. Okay.
So this is, I mean, from this standpoint, though, I think it's perfect timing. The governance board has stood up. This is one area I think that you can target for your getting that output. You've got great, I think, examples in LA and the Bay Area, and having gone through this and defining where you guys need coverage. Some probably great lessons learned from that process that you can learn. But this is ultimately the goal that you'll need to provide back so they can design it.
Brian, I mean, how many of these were done prior to FirstNet? Portland, go back 6 to 9 months, maybe a dozen or so?
No, we'd engaged the technical team before we did
So this is one of the key things going forward that we think is just a phenomenal tool for the states. I mean, to have that kind of information during a state consultation is, I think, a huge leap in the right direction.
Having this kind of information for an emergency management perspective is just huge. I mean, I don't think.
Right. And doesn't cost you much.
So that's task number one, right? Task number two is then looking at users. So as I mentioned, coverage is a key, obviously key consideration for the design of a network, but user is also a very key consideration because with this technology, depending on how many users you have in an area, that could drive the design more than the actual coverage of where you need those power. So because user capacity is a very big consideration. So again, we tried to compile as much information as we could on a national basis. We put that together, and it's available, but then giving it to the states and then letting you, improve upon it, augment it. These are the user groups that we had actually worked with FirstNet a while back to try to target, just to try to get some counts, some estimations. These are by all no means the FirstNet approved, who has access, who doesn't. Just kind of targeting some likely groups and knowing that it kind of varies from state to state.
Brian, would that include the various agencies within a tribe as well? Like you have the courts and the...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that,
So it's just kind of rolled up by discipline, but yeah, if you want to break it up. And really this is just to show an example of the roll up. It's going to be used in different ways. If you take it here just to kind of get a sense of how many agencies are there, ultimately you can get a sense of how many people there are with respect to those agencies. But at the end of the day, as Ed was pointing out, you need to know how many devices there are because we pay by device, and that's what actually uses the network. It's not by users. So are people sharing devices? We have multiple devices. Trying to figure out how many devices we're talking about representing California, and then how they would be potentially distributed on the network. That's a huge driver for the design of the network. So this is just what we put together, just to show as an example. Again, we hand that out to you. But the more detail you can gather, the more information you can gather, and the more you can break kind of this down of where those users would be operating, so the better the design would be for the network. So that's really the focus of the second component on identifying users. As you may know, we we put out tools again free of use. They're voluntary tools; you don't have to use them, but you can. So we recently released enough improvement or enhancement to our one of our main tools, CASM, the Communication Asset Survey and Mapping Tool, the next generation. So in that, we took all of that agency data that we can accumulate from different sources, from FEMA fire reporting, from some commercial sources, from existing CASM data. We aggregated it all together. And so just in California alone now, there's over 3,000 agencies in CASM with contact info if we had it, agency count info if we had it. That can give a resource if you wanted to go capture more of that information. We also have the mobile data survey tool, which it looks like the survey that is in there is a version of that. And that tool can be used. It's already pre-built. We coordinated with FirstNet again, having gone through several iterations of that with different states. They gave us some great feedback that said, really, if you could structure it in this way to get this data and be broken down in this way, then it can really help feed some of our design criteria and the business plan. So we did that. It's available for use. It's literally just tells if you want to activate it for California, we can turn it on. And it already has all the reporting and analysis and reporting built into it. And then also the nice thing about it is anything you collect from here where there's overlap in the CASM, it feeds that information in the CASM, so you don't have to go kind of repeat the data entry. So, and those are the kind of the main topic areas that it focuses on for that survey. So those tools are available on free charge. And that's it. So those are the three topics of the day. It usually runs about 3 hours, so it's a kind of a nice, if you want to do it in the morning or afternoon. When I was just in Arizona last week, on Friday, we went from about 9 to 12:30. Had some great discussion along the way. I think that everyone kind of got an appreciation for what was the task at hand. And it really, I think, helps focus people on, there are so many things that need to be done for the duration of this consultation process. This can really kind of help you focus in on some of those early tasks.
So knowing what you've already done with other states and looking at California, how many regions would you recommend that we do these planning sessions now?
I think a lot of it depends on how you're going to break down that regional structure. So I was in Texas a couple weeks ago. They're probably the extreme example, 254 counties. They organize into
regional.
Yeah, they already organize into regions of councils of government. So they've got 24 COGs within the state. And so what they did is they brought in the leaders of all those COGs, had this meeting to inform them, and then they're going to figure out plans in each of those COGs of how they plan to go and gather this information and roll it back into the state. So I mean, certainly for planning regions, if you're set up that way structurally, you could do that. I think that's a way to structure. If you wanted to go down deeper, it all depends on kind of. I think I would recommend leveraging whatever existing organization structure.
Yeah, we have emergency, through CalOES. We already have like our region set up through that. That probably would be the easiest for us to do. Since we already have our city and county emergency managers all connected to that as well.
It's kind of like how FirstNet's approaching the FEMA model, right?
Yes.
Why create something that everyone already knows?
The only thing in California is that we have the OES regions. CHP has different regions. Everybody has a different region in California, different agencies. But since we're the lead agency, I think we're going to go with the OES region.
Yeah, there's 6 usually regions.
So as you can see, we can put together the books and however you want to structure that. We've got the material, so it's just a matter of when you hopefully have a better understanding of what it entails, and just let us know when you're ready. Any other questions?
Yeah, take this one.
Yeah, they're just examples, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from Arizona's perspective, having it, for us anyway, the county level with only 15 counties, it really allowed people to focus on just what was meaningful to them and say, oh, okay, well, you've got all the agencies that I'm familiar with, that's good. And you've got, oh yeah, there's the power plant or the dam or whatever. I mean, it really brings it home to what's concerning to them. It's not just this national thing or the federal thing or the state, even the state thing. It's, they can see their name of their agency.
Yeah. That's why I think our regions would work, because they already know the critical infrastructure that's out there, whether it's a dam or a nuclear power plant or whatever it is. And then on top of this, I'm sure the regions will be having the same discussion that we had briefly earlier, are we going to have money, so is all the money going to go to one area because of the population? So even in California, as you look at whatever we end up, FirstNet.
No, I was subtly getting that.
Yeah. But we're going to have that in California also, with the number of tribes that we have, with the number of counties and the rural areas that we have. They're going to be just as concerned. So one thing really good is that the LA basin is taken care of through the VPOP grant, because for us that's huge.
Just to touch on, a little bit on the rural piece. In the legislation, it's one of our mandates. We have to explore and we have to ensure rural areas are covered. And just to go back a little bit too, it's leveraging the technology, being able to use deployables, to take the network with you. That's going to be and we also got to think too, whilst the urban areas are what they are today, they're going to expand in the future, right? And ensuring that as the network evolves, as populations tend to grow, to make sure we're adaptable is also important. And I think that's going to be the case in every state.
Yes, and I read somewhere just last week of the number of people moving to California every day. That will be something that we will want to bring in and apply to the regions as we look at how we're building this out.
Future growth projections. Any other questions?